Hello everyone, this is Dr. A from History Surfer, welcome. And this is part 2 of the Middle Ages lecture. We begin with the Gothic style, which emerged, as you can see here, in approximately 1150. And the place that we see it come to fruition is going to be at Saint Denis. Led by Abbo Suger, the new idea was to allow more light into the structure by using some innovative things. They had been formulated and actually had been, we see it emerging in other places, but he's actually the one credited with it because he brings it to this particular spot and he puts it all together, if you will. Saint Denis was the church where the kings of France were buried, and so Suger wanted to make it the premier church of the land. He's an interesting character, small man who had big ideas, and he said that about himself, and it's actually, that's not a direct quote, but actually something like that on his epitaph on his grave. And so Suger has us see this incredible building come together, which started fundamentally as a Romanesque structure. You can see that here in the front, but then he begins to build this program where we see pointed arch being used with a flying buttress and the inclusion of stained glass. And that makes a difference. With that, we have a curtain wall that was very thin, as now the vault, the pointed arch, was being supported by the flying buttress, and the walls were not needed to support that. Inside the church, we have a glorious inclusion of light. You can see here the tombs of the kings and queens of France. My favorite, of course, being this focal point, which I believe is a focal point of Marie Antoinette and Louis XVI. But not only is the light incredible, but the windows allowed stories to be included from the Bible. The vault is with this beautiful ribbing. These are groin vaults, and that's another characteristic of the Gothic. But you don't have to know that. That's something I talk more about in my art history classes. But still, look at how beautiful and light and airy now we have church become. It is about that. Light represents the divine. But the purpose of the windows was to really help the congregation understand biblical text. I also want you to notice here the Christ child as he's depicted in the Middle Ages. We talked about this during the Byzantine period, but certainly that carries on where he's shown as a little man. Here's Mary and Joseph, and he is never shown as a baby during the Middle Ages. We just don't see that. The mind of the people of the Middle Ages was he was never a baby. He was always kind of this shrunken man. The glorious light was now let into the space, and they could tell stories like this is about the kings of France. And it was beautiful, and rose windows were the showcase of the buildings. These were on the crossings, at the end of crossings usually, and also we see them on the facade as well. But they are symbols of Mary, and so they are glorious, windows, and again, it's a facilitator for the divine. Perhaps the most inclusive all Gothic building is Chartres Cathedral. Chartres is holistically Gothic. If we look at it, it doesn't look like the arch is very pointed when you first look in there. And by the way, this is during World War II, and many of these churches were damaged. Chartres maintained many of its original stained glass windows. That's why it's considered one of the better churches to see. But it is a very broad nave. The nave is this part right here. And when you broaden the nave, as it is done at Chartres, you're going to get a less pointy looking arch. But it works at Chartres because Chartres got this really beautiful labyrinth. It was a church that was difficult to build because the taxes that were raised on the surrounding population fundamentally caused some problems. But it is a 118-foot high nave, and Chartres is, as I said, unique because it has most of its original stained glass windows. This, by the way, if you don't remember, those of you who are in my class, these are flying buttresses. They support the vault, and of course, they push the weight down. If you see the plan of the buildings, it's definitely the formula is set that they are Roman cross plans, and you see that here clearly. On the front porch, we also have a very detailed sculptural program, and the portal system, the portal, anything to do with the front door. The door is the portal. It has these very elongated sculpture which seem to function more as columns visually. Don't forget, no life-size freestanding sculpture yet, but definitely something that is very much a part of the architecture. The labyrinth inside is one of the largest labyrinth here, and you walk the labyrinth simulating your journey to heaven. Looking at the stained glass, you can see the age of the stained glass with the heavy leading, but certainly it is rich. Real stained glass is very, very saturated. Modern stained glass doesn't quite have this saturation, and it's because of the technique. This is, very labor intensive. Chartres was a place to go on pilgrimage as well, and the relic that was contained there was the tunic of the Virgin Mary. Possibly one of the most decorative buildings that emerged in the Gothic period was Amiens Cathedral. Amiens is done in a style that some people have called too decorated. It has a lot of denteling work, and the ornate facade and tons of sculptures are really, for some people, too much. It is unique, though, too, because it is an extreme statement of Gothic verticality. The nave is only 49 feet wide, and the interior soars up 136.5 feet. We do know the master builder who designed the church. His name was Robert de Lussarches, and he is recorded in a mosaic on the floor of that name. His son also worked there. When you look at the front porch here, it is a stunning decorative tympanum. It's a very narrow tympanum, and that's due to the fact that this is a very narrow structure. It's had a lot of structural problems through the ages. It had a partial collapse because some of the buttressing work by Robert's son was made very lacy, and so it endangered the structure. They actually had to do some work to tighten it up a little bit. And here you see how much more elaborate this is. The 3 levels of earth, heaven, and hell are portrayed here as the souls are either going to heaven or to hell. And there you see God or Christ enthroned. And we see the chaos of, let me go down just a little bit, of hell, as well as the simplicity of heaven. Very much a mindset of the Middle Ages. But look at how much fuller these are. We have a very, very high level of craftsmanship here. In the interior, the nave goes up. We're coming from Chartres. That was the last one. We're looking at a nave there of 118 feet. When you go from 118 to 136.5 feet, it's a big step. And this is, one of the problems with the structure. It's sheerness. It's just so vertical. Look at the groin vaulting, and look at the very careful arrangement of the ribbing. It's very beautiful. The building itself today is still visited because it has this great relic. A lot of art historians have criticized Amiens because it's structurally, it's not sound, but still you have to appreciate the amount of work going into this structure. The relic here is the head of John the Baptist. So many of these are interesting to me, so I show them. Amiens is kind of worth a trip just to see this, as far as I'm concerned. It was a really important trading center north of Paris, Amiens, and this was the biggest cathedral when it was done until, of course, we see the building of Notre Dame in Paris. It is the largest of the Gothic cathedrals, and when it was completed, it was the tallest structure in the West. It is in Paris, on the island in Ile-de-Cité in the middle, and it was where the kings and queens of France attended church. Opening in 1250, it wasn't really complete yet, but still, it was usable. We have a nave here that reaches 226 feet, so now we're jumping another 100 feet up. And that is all the way to the top of the roof line. You can see here it's enormous rose window. This picture's from a boat, so we are on the river Seine. And it is definitely a giant step forward as far as the quality of the sculpture. If you want to talk about quality being representational, there's always that debate. What is quality? But still, you can see quite clearly here, we're getting more rounded figures. When we look on the side of the door and the portal, Mary, although she has this Gothic sway to her, definitely feels like she could step off the building. And on the other side, there's Saint Denis being escorted by the angels, and that's a representation of one of the kings of France. Saint Denis lost his head when he was martyred, and he held his head, and the angels guided him to where he stopped, and that's where the church was built. We looked at Saint Denis already. Inside, you can see this wonderful nave and that wonderful ceiling with the very beautifully decorated upper levels of the clerestory. That's called a clerestory. Very big windows, very light in there, and the giant rose window that many people admire. This building, unfortunately, in April of 2019 caught on fire. And I'm making this lecture in 2024, so it's supposedly the reconstruction is being completed as we speak. That's what I've heard. But you can see it was massively engulfed in flames, even taking down the spire. It was believed that the fire started on the roof. They were doing some restoration work, and the old wood up there caught on fire. No one's ever been blamed. Not that I've heard of. Perhaps one day. And you can see the result of that. Notre Dame is the peak of the Gothic style. And the Gothic style, as we move into looking at painting, definitely reflects in the later stages the coming of the Renaissance. By now, Italy became a focal point for the immersion of that's not the word I'm looking for, the emergence, sorry about that, of professional artists, as people like Duccio began to have workshops and they took apprentices on, and there they began to train artisans to, start to become more regular, I would say, as a way to put it. Duccio, considered the last great master of the Byzantine style, displays all of the characteristics of a Byzantine artist. We have a very gold background. We have also hierarchic proportion here, showing you who to look at. Of course, it's the Virgin, but also including people of the period. For instance, here's a church, one of the leaders of the church, and we know these are real people. So we're starting to see this mesh of the present and the past. With Duccio, we have a real look at how painting was going to emerge. And his work really is a pre-Renaissance step, if you will. He was from Siena. The Christ child is starting to look more baby-like, while the body is lost underneath here still. We'll start to see Duccio and the influence of his student, Cimabue, become more prevalent. The person who will make the first true step out of the Gothic and Middle Ages in art is Giotto. Giotto was a visionary. Many people have reevaluated Giotto's work. I've seen some really interesting, ideas about Giotto. And if it wasn't for when he was born, he would definitely be considered a part of the Renaissance. But he's a little early for the Renaissance, so we still keep him in that period. He's a Florentine painter, and his teacher was Cimabue. He is considered, because he learned from their that line to be still part of that Byzantine school, but I think he really steps away from that. He's the first genius of art in the Italian Renaissance, sorry. He was being, freed from the shackles of the past, if you will. The medieval ideas that had dominated for so long were starting to loosen. He dealt mostly in religious subjects, but he gave these religious subjects more of an earthly feel. So he's an important step. Don't forget Giotto. We see here the Virgin. Again, it's very similar as far as the idea of the gold background, the use of hierarchic proportion, but now the Virgin looks like a very real woman. As her hair, we can see that, as well as she has breasts. And that's a, telling thing. She's starting to emerge as a human being. His Arena Chapel frescoes even attempt backgrounds and settings that he was unfamiliar with. Obviously, this is supposed to be the desert and the Holy Land, but still, he does give personality. And I think that's what I always find. So even the angels, I'm a lover of Giotto's angels, have personality. They look on in horror at Christ's crucifixion. Look at this one right here. He tears his clothes open in distress. And the despair of the Virgin Mary, and Mary Magdalene crying here at his feet. The person who had the painting done here, as well as we have this allusion to the king here. He's Italian, he's Florentine, he works in other media besides painting. He's an architect as well, but still, painting is his number one thing. And his intense interest in the psychology behind this stuff, again, I look at the angels when I talk about this, is what makes him so different. As you can see here, Christ may not look very realistic, but he is definitely more full-bodied than we've seen.